When I was growing up, I was born in 1953. I was definitely a child of the 60s. I would have many teenage arguments and discussions with my parents about interdating and intermarriage, and I would want to know, like, what is the hang-up and what's the problem with dating non-Jews and even marrying non-Jews? And my parents would say, because you're Jewish and Jews don't marry non-Jews. And I would say, why? They said, because you're Jewish and Jews don't. But why don't we? Because you're Jewish. And you can hear how incredibly convincing and compelling this must have been to a teenager. Before I left for university, I had a meeting, actually my first meeting in my life, with a rabbi. And the question of interdating came up, and I wanted to know what the rabbi's take was. The rabbi explained to me that the problem with intermarriage was that if all Jews would marry non-Jews, then the Jewish people would basically no longer exist, we'd disappear. The rabbi assumed that this was a slam dunk and that his case was made, and my reaction was simply, so what? So what if all the Jewish people disappear? Will somehow the ecosystem no longer be able to function without Jewish people in the world? Will somehow the world come crashing down if there are no more Jewish people in the world? Why was it so crucial and critical for Jewish people to survive? My thought was, are we living in a world where life and history is some bizarre contest where the longest living religion at the end of history wins? Is that the purpose of Jewish survival? And to me, the Jewish taboos against interdating and intermarriage smacked of racism. And today, many young Jewish people feel exactly the same way. Now let's fast forward to the year 1997. I went to Windsor, Ontario. I was invited to speak to a group of Jewish law students. The topic I was given was the threat of Jews for Jesus and Christian missionaries to the Jewish community. And I was in the middle of my presentation, and one of the young students, a young woman, interrupted me, and she said, Rabbi, none of us are really that interested in this topic of Christian missionaries. What we really want to understand is, why shouldn't we date non-Jews? Why shouldn't we marry non-Jews? And that was the question that she said she was really concerned with, and that was the question she thought her group would really want to hear about. I said to her, it's an important issue, but you're asking the wrong question. She said, what do you mean I'm asking the wrong question? I said, if you're asking me at this stage in your life why you shouldn't marry or date non-Jews, it's not the right question. So what should I be asking, she wanted to know. I said, the question that you really have to answer, the critical question is, why should you be Jewish? You have to clarify yourself, is there really a good reason for me to be a Jew? And I said to her that if for you Judaism is profoundly meaningful and fulfilling and compelling, and so much so that you have to wrap your entire life around it so that it becomes the center and the organizing force of your life, if that's your understanding and embrace of Judaism, then I really won't have to give you any reasons for why it wouldn't make sense for you to marry someone who wasn't Jewish. I believe that Dennis Prager said it very well. He said, if Judaism is important, then no arguments against intermarriage are necessary. But if Judaism isn't important, then no arguments against intermarriage will be effective. Let's go a little bit deeper. And I want you to listen to what I'm going to say now very carefully. When I was in the market looking to date, looking to get married, I wasn't only eliminating non-Jews as potential dates. I wouldn't have considered dating Jews who didn't take Judaism seriously. This is not a racial issue. The only problem with the non-Jew is that they don't take Judaism seriously. The non-Jew does not commit him, herself, or herself to living Jewishly. Judaism is not the center of the life of the non-Jew. And that's why they don't make an appropriate marriage partner for someone who wraps themselves around Judaism and who makes Judaism the center of their life. But that same problem applies to a tremendously large number of Jews as well. There's nothing wrong with the Gentile. There's nothing wrong with the non-Jew. The same problem with marrying the non-Jew, when you really understand the problem, applies to, unfortunately, a vast number of Jewish people in the world today as well. If the non-Jew became interested in Judaism and committed themselves to Judaism, then they would make a perfectly good and fine marriage partner. Racism is absolutely no part of the calculus. It's simply a question of, what am I committed to? Who am I? What do I wrap my life around? What are we really asking the next generation to do? We're sending off young people to university, and we're expecting them to essentially write off, eliminate, reject over 95% of the potential dating pool they can date. We live in a world that's a very alienated world. People really want to have relationships. They want to have people that they can have a close relationship with. They want to have a spouse, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. They want to have a partner. It's very difficult to find someone that you can fall in love with. It's extremely difficult. And into a world where it's so hard for people to find their matches, we send off young Jews and we expect them to make a sacrifice where they're willing to say, over 95% of the people that I am going to meet, I will reject out of hand. I will not consider dating them. What must it take for someone to make that sacrifice? Why would they ever make such a sacrifice? Because it's going to hurt mommy and daddy if I come home with a non-Jew? That does not cut it these days. Young Jewish people say to themselves, and they're quite correct, mommy and daddy will have to just get used to it. They'll have to deal with it. It's my life. And so the fear of letting down parents is not stopping young Jewish people from intermarrying. In the more than 30 years that I've been doing counseling with Jews who have embraced other religions, with Jews who are intermarrying, with Jews who become, in the words of Shlomo Carlebach, Jews for nothing, I found that all of these people have something in common. Very unsophisticated levels of understanding what Judaism is, and very superficial Jewish experiences. These two are a deadly combination. Our prophets already cried out in the Bible over 2,500 years ago, "My people perish due to a lack of knowledge." We certainly can't expect people to develop a deep attachment to Judaism, so deep and profound that they're willing to sacrifice for it, if their understanding of Judaism is so incredibly shallow. One of the things I've done for years is administer to university students a Jewish IQ test. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, it's not a real IQ test, but it illustrates something that's very, very significant. I asked Jewish university students who the mother of Jesus was. A surprisingly high number of Jewish students know at least what Christians believe to be the name of the mother of Jesus, Mary. I asked these same Jewish students, what is the name of the mother of Moses? Virtually no student has ever known that. I ask Jewish students today, who is Lady Gaga? Of course, anyone that has a pulse on the planet has heard of Lady Gaga. I ask Jewish students, who was Deborah in the Bible? I haven't met many Jewish students who knew who Deborah was. I asked Jewish university students, can you name any of the 4 Gospels in the Christian Bible? And you'd be surprised how many Jewish students can say, oh yeah, I think there's a Matthew, a John, a Luke, a Mark. I asked these same Jewish students, can you name any of the tractates of the Babylonian Talmud? Our books. Most Jewish university students cannot name any of these books. We asked Jewish university students, can you name the author of Das Kapital? Most university students can do that. Ask the same students who wrote the Guide to the Perplexed. Far fewer students can name the author of that. Ask Jewish people today, have they heard of Nostradamus? Do they know who Nostradamus was? Yes, virtually everyone. Do they know who Onkelos was? They don't know who Onkelos was. Ask Jewish university students what date is celebrated as the birthday of Jesus. Most Jewish university students will know about December 25th. Ask the same Jewish university students what day was the day that Moses was born. I've almost never met a Jewish university student who knew that. Ask a Canadian Jewish university students what is a hat trick. It's hard to find a Canadian who doesn't know what a hat trick is. Ask them if they know what a Siyum Hashas is. They probably won't know that. Ask Jewish university students if they know what the Trinity is, what the Trinity refers to. They probably know exactly what that refers to. Ask them what the word Taryag refers to. They probably won't know that. Ask Jewish students in Canada, who was the first Prime Minister of Canada? Probably many, if not most, will know that. Ask who was the first king of Israel. Probably very few would know that. While many of our students have learned a smattering of Hebrew, some Bible stories, a little bit of Jewish history, and some of the customs of the holidays, but very few of our students have ever been exposed to the profoundly deep philosophical and mystical teachings of Judaism, to the beauty of the sophisticated wisdom of Judaism, to the writings of the Maharal Miprag, of the Sfas Emes, of the Kuzari, of Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, of any of the great Jewish thinkers over the past 2,000 years. Most of our Jewish students have not been exposed to this treasure chest whatsoever. What a crime and what a tragedy. We encourage our children to get advanced secular degrees. Very few Jewish families proudly put on the wall their child's high school diploma. Most Jewish families expect university and obviously today graduate school education. We wouldn't think of sending our children into the world with less. And yet we're satisfied, unfortunately, with a mediocre level of Jewish knowledge that we think naively will compete with everything else they're going to be exposed to in the world today. The truth is that very few Jewish people really abandon Judaism because so few Jewish people really know much about it at all. And then I mentioned, aside from shallow levels of Jewish education, I mentioned superficial Jewish spiritual experiences. For so many Jewish people, synagogue experiences are not very moving. They're often described as boring. It's very rare that we'll see people crying in a synagogue. For so many Jewish people, prayer is simply reading words out of a book. And so many Jewish people are surprised when I tell them, you can pray in your own language. You can actually speak to God using your own words. Really? We can do that? That's allowed? If we look at the trajectory of the typical Jew who becomes a Christian today, or a Buddhist, or a Sufi, or a Sikh, or a Hindu, and you ask them, what was your Jewish upbringing like? They'll tell you that they went to Hebrew school, they had a bar bat mitzvah, they lit Hanukkah candles, they had family seders for Passover, they may have gone to a Jewish summer camp or on a trip to Israel. But they'll tell you that they never experienced any of those experiences as spiritual. They will tell you that for them Judaism was cultural, it was an ethnicity, it was a heritage, it was an identity. But they'll say they don't remember, they never experienced anything in their Jewish upbringing that they experienced as a spiritual experience. About 100 years ago, there was a young intellectual Jew in Germany who also felt that Judaism was empty and not spiritual. And he decided to convert to a truly spiritual religion. His decision was to become a Christian. And so Franz Rosenzweig was about to go to be baptized, but he decided that before he gets baptized, he will give Judaism one last try. And so Rosenzweig walked into a little synagogue in Germany. His mazel, it happened to be the evening of Yom Kippur. It was the evening of Kol Nidre. And something extremely powerful must have been going on in that little synagogue that Franz Rosenzweig walked into in Germany 100 years ago. Because he walked out resolving not to continue with his decision to convert to Christianity, but rather to dedicate his life to pursuing Judaism. That must have been some synagogue experience. But whenever I think of that story, I ask myself, what would it be like if today, if this Shabbat, a young person in Toronto, about to convert to another religion, decided to give Judaism one last chance, and just walked into a synagogue here in Toronto? Would the experience they had in a typical Torontonian synagogue, or anywhere else in the world for that matter, turn them around? Would it be so deep and inspiring and moving and passionate and emotional and mystical and godly that they would say, wow, this is where I'm going to stay. This is where I belong. When I went to India in 1998 to make Passover seders for Israeli travelers, I had a young woman sitting next to me. We sat for 8 hours there on the floor of an old hotel in India. This woman had come to India 3 years prior to live. She came from California. She's living in a town in northern India that had running sewage going through the town. And I asked her, how is it that you came to live here in India? She told me that when she was in California, she tried to find spirituality in Judaism. And she went from synagogue to synagogue. And she told me what her experience was basically this committee and this meeting and this brotherhood and this sisterhood and another meeting and another committee. And she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, you know, I was just looking to be able to go to a place where I could feel reverent. A place where I could go and sit and feel that I was sitting in the presence of God. Back to our question. Can Judaism really be that important that we can wrap our entire life around it? Can Judaism be that compelling that it's really worth preserving and sacrificing for?